So I know it's this weird spring break. Our kids had spring break last week, and I know that there are some families that have spring break this week, and we're in this kind of weird middle zone. And I think that, coupled with the fact that we're really leading up to Easter, because it does feel early, I've had this story that's just been stuck in my head. You know when it's like, you know when you get a song stuck in your head and you just keep thinking about it and singing it over and over and again? I've had that, but with this story. I don't know if that weird. Does that happen to anybody else? Okay, and so here's the thing. It was a short story that was written. It's by a Danish author, and it was adapted into a movie in the 80s. But I'm going to give you just a quick. Does anyone want a quick summary of the story? We spent like the whole week at Disney, and I'm still like, there's just like magic pixie dust like stuck in all my gears. I'm not back with it yet. So I might need a quick moment to get there. Okay, so here's the story. The story is this. It's set in Holland. It's like the late 1800s, and it's centered on this woman who is a refugee. She is a political refugee from France, and she is sent over kind of by this acquaintance to these two sisters, these Dutch sisters, and she's presented as like a housekeeper. And these two sisters are these like aging spinsters, and they preside over their late father's a kind of congregation. He had this ministry, and he's since passed on, and they've kind of taken at the helm, and they're continuing to work in this congregation and to serve this small kind of provincial community. And she shows up like in the midst of this storm, and she's completely like just distressed, and she was like, I've been sent here because someone said maybe you could use me as a housekeeper. And these two ladies are like, we're like just two old ladies feeding a couple like old guys in the community, and when we don't really need that. But they decide to keep her on because she said she'd work for free. She has nowhere else to go. She's lost everything in France. And so we see as the story goes on that part of her duties as being the new housekeeper, she's going to be the cook. They provide food for people in the community. And what they cook for their community is, there's a term for it, which I can't pronounce. It's a certain kind of soup, but it's basically like day-old stale bread and beer, like schlop. It's literally like just like the thing that there's nothing really appealing about what the soup is, and they make it in the most like boring way. There's a scene where they're showing how she makes it. And it's like no salt, no pepper, no anything. It's just old bread, warm beer. You let it sit overnight till it gets extra gross, and then you eat it. And that's it. And that's one of the things that is in her job. So anyways, the story goes through what it looks like. She's there for about 15 years, just kind of getting to know the community, serving the community, making the schloppity schlop that they eat every day. And she really becomes integral and part of this community. But over this same time, the community, this congregation, really, there's just all these divisions, right? They're really getting itchy with each other, and it kind of shows just sort of these fractions and these butting heads between them. And this woman, her name is Babette. There's the movie that was made called Babette's Feast. Has anybody in here seen that, other than Kevin? Okay, so good. If you haven't, go see it. It's really this wonderful movie, but for the three of you guys are in. You're gonna hone in on this. Anyways, so she's there, and the one kind of clue that she has back to her former life is this lottery ticket that is like renewed every year, and on the 14th year she wins. She finds out that she wins this huge amount of money. Like now it'd be like maybe the equivalent of like $100,000. And so what she decides she wants to do is she wants to hold a feast. She wants to hold a feast for the people that are in this congregation, because they're coming up on like the 100th birthday of the late founder of it. And the sisters, they're kind of like, there's pious Protestant ladies, and they're kind of like, I don't know. We've got all this soup. We have lots of stale bread, lots of beer. I don't know if we need to do this whole feast thing. But they agree to do it, and she says, I'm going to prepare the feast. I'm going to pay for it, let me do it. And it shows as she's like bringing in all these ingredients, these exotic things getting set in from France. And the sisters are so like, they're starting to get nervous. They're like, oh, what is this stuff? What are all these exotic ingredients, And they start getting really suspicious. That she's got some devilish intent of what she's doing. And it actually says in part of it that they get together and they're like, what is this witch's Sabbath that she's preparing for us? And so what they do is they get together as a congregation. This is going somewhere. And they decide that they are going to eat the feast, but they're not going to say anything about it. They're just going to keep quiet about it. They're like, I don't know. We won't talk about the food. It'll be like we never even had taste buds. So long story, this feast happens. And there's one person at the feast who's sitting at the table, who came in from out of town. He's someone's nephew, and he didn't get the note that you're not supposed to enjoy this feast that they're having. And she prepares this 12-course meal, and every course that comes out, he savors every bite. He's in astonishment. He's absolutely marveling that he is eating this delicious food in the middle of nowhere. And it reminds him of this food he had once at this fancy restaurant in France. And by the end of the feast, it didn't even turn into this witch's Sabbath, which they thought, but at the end they show the congregation, these people that came to the feast, and they're outside, and they're in the moonlight, and they're holding hands, and they're dancing in a circle, but they're singing hymns to God. It has completely transformed them. It's kind of shed off this layer of all this animosity and all these things they were having before, and they really stepped into the delight of what this feast was. And I think the reason I've been thinking about this and thinking about the feast is, like I said, kind of moving into Easter, into spring break. I was thinking about how often do I just sort of accept the stale bread and the ale soup that is put before me when there's an invitation to a feast, an absolutely just delightful, gorgeous feast in front of me. But when I see it, it's not like, yeah, take me there. I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't trust that. I don't know what's going to happen if I go there. That's like witch's Sabbath stuff over there. I'm not sure about that. And it reminds me, there's this really famous C.S. Lewis quote, and I know I've said it before, and so you guys have probably heard it, but I'm going to put it up there anyways because it's famous for a reason. It's really good. It reminds me of this. It says, "It would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at sea. We are far too easily pleased." I want to look at Psalm 36 this morning because I think it really does a good job, kind of broken up in these two parts, of looking at this tension, of what it looks like for us to accept kind of what is placed right before us, and then what is the offer of something more, this thing that we can't even see. I mean, the thing with the C.S. Lewis quote where it talks about the child is he's ignorant. Not that he's not a smart child, but he doesn't know. He's never been to the sea. He has no idea what that offer is for him. And so I want to really look at the tension in this. And honestly, it's a little bit of a brutally honest kind of expose of maybe a person who's in that spot. So I'm just going to kind of tell you that as we look at it. But it also describes what is on the other side of that, the feast that God has for us. So we want to start at Psalm 36. "Transgression speaks to the wicked deep in his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes, for he flatters himself in his own eyes, that his iniquity cannot be found out and hated. The words of his mouth are trouble and deceit. He has ceased to act wisely and to do good. He plots trouble while on his bed, and he sets himself in a way that is not good. He does not reject evil. Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mountains of God. Your judgments are like the great deep. Man and beast, O Lord, you save. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the rivers of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life, and in your light do we see light. Oh, continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright of heart. Let not the foot of arrogance come upon me, nor the hand of the wicked drive me away. There the evildoers lie fallen. They are thrust down, unable to rise. So looking at this psalm, there's this thought of these three main forces that come against us, and that's the world. That's kind of the external struggle that's around us. It's our flesh, it's our internal struggle, and the enemy. It's the spiritual struggle that comes against us. And there's a book recently, the most recent one is John Mark Comer, who is like a kind of famous pastor and author, well-known, I should say, out of Seattle, wrote a book recently, and his kind of subtitle in that is Recognize and Resist the Three Enemies That Sabotage Your Peace. I'm not going to go into the whole thing. Like I said, there's a book, but it's a good book if you guys want to take a look at it. It's called Live No Lies. But I feel like this passage really sets up kind of a framework for what it looks like if we are under kind of the thumb of those three forces against us, and the way that it really keeps us from experiencing peace with God. I'm going to look at a couple of it. If we go back up to verse 1, it says, transgression speaks to the wicked deep in his heart. Already we see the kind of the influence of the enemy against us. It's that kind of lies and that whispers of the enemy, but we see the person in here that we're talking about is someone who's really accepted those. They've accepted them as truth. They've accepted them as gospel. They've manifested them. They're sort of living them out. And we can see that someone who's really under the influence of the enemy. Next it says, he flatters himself in his own eyes that his iniquity cannot be found out. Not only is this a person who is living under this deep kind of spiritual depravity, but they're so focused on themselves that they can't see it. They're completely blinded to their condition. And we see as this person moves out into the world that it's someone who is not rejecting evil. Right? There is trouble, there is deceit on their mouth. Even the picture of them lying in bed at night, kind of scheming and planning about what's next and what's their next move and how are they going to kind of move forward for themselves into the world. And the thing is I think when we look at this person kind of laid out in the psalm like that, it seems like a kind of insufferable person. This is not somebody that we all want to be around, right? But the truth is, this is the normal condition, completely acceptable normal condition of our society, of the world that we live in, of the culture that we are part of. And we see people all over our world that are not kind of they're not chastised for this, but they're really kind of promoted and lifted up as being a person that is like this. I mean, this is kind of a big example, but when I was looking about this, I was thinking about Mark Zuckerberg, who's like the founder of Facebook and the owner of Meta and all that. And there was that whole thing last year where he had to go in front of Congress because there's all these studies saying, hey, guess what? Social media is really bad, especially for kids. And it kind of looks like your company is actively promoting this really bad stuff to children. And so there's this whole thing in there. There's these like letters, internal emails from the company that says, oh, actually, yeah, that's true. It is really bad. They know it's really bad. They don't really care. They're still promoting algorithms. But this is like a tech mogul. This is one of the most well-known, popular kind of names in our culture. And instead of people being like, oh, he's terrible, like, oh yeah, it's Mark Zuckerberg. He's famous. He's got a lot of money, right? This is the culture that we live in. This is kind of the state of our world. And I think that it probably wouldn't be too hard for us. I know he's kind of an extreme example, to think of somebody maybe that we know in our lives that sort of fits this position. Someone who's focused on themselves, sort of constantly scheming, kind of thinking about what the next move is for them, and they're not really concerned about kind of the greater good. And church, the thing is for me is, unfortunately, I don't really have to look that far to think of that person, because that is the way that I lived my life for so long. I was someone who was just so inwardly focused on myself. There was not a fear of God in what I was doing. I mean, it was the cup that I was handed, right? It was every man for himself, not God come for every man, but I drank from that cup. I sat at that table and I ate. But there's no nourishment in that meal. There's no satisfaction, right? Years and years of eating at that feast, and there is no joy in it. And the thing is, no matter how much you eat of it, you're still hungry. So hungry. And so you reach for more of what it is that the world offers, more of what it is that you think you can do for yourself or store up for yourself. And it's a vicious cycle, because the more you do that, the hungrier you are. And it's this just cycle of feeding and consuming, and it just leaves you nowhere. And so I want us to look at the other part of the psalm. Is what is the other way, right? If we are sitting at the table and we're eating our soup and we know that it is not sustaining us, but it's the only soup that we've ever had, and we don't know what else to do about it, what is the way that God offers us? It says, your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mountains of God. Your judgments are like the great deep. Man and beast you save, O Lord. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life, and in your light do we see light. We see God and how he can overcome the flesh, how he overcomes the world, how he overcomes the enemy. It says, your steadfast love. His steadfast love is where we find ourselves. It's not our strivings or our job or our money or what we look like or who we're with, our reputation, our power, our status, or lack thereof. All of those things that we use to kind of build ourselves up, right? Our pecking order at the table. That's what we do. We peck our way to our order, and then we fight for our place. But God says, no, it's not that. It's my steadfast love. You don't have to strive for that. We see in there the imagery of God's righteousness, that those are the foundations of the world. His faithfulness, these are the things that he offers us. And the picture of us being under the shadow of his wing, a lot of the times God's imagery is used as an eagle. And an eagle is fierce. Have you ever seen an eagle up close? I mean, I think those things feel like, I don't know this, but I feel like their little beaks could probably like jab a hole in our skulls. They could definitely peck our eyes out. I mean, they're no joke. But even eagles, I know, I'm just saying it's true. I had my picture taken once at like a Bass Pro Shop. My dad was like, I'm going to give you $20. Go take your picture with the eagle. And I was just like, ugh. But the idea is God is like that eagle, right? But the thing is we're under the shadow of his wing. What do birds do? Their fledglings go under their wings to protect them. Because even eagles have predators, other birds often that are circling around, just waiting for a minute to come down and strike. Right? And that's the enemy. And then God says, I will give you protection, refuge from the enemy. And so it's establishing the order of God, not the order of the world. And once we are established in his order, it is in that place where he can lead us to the table that he has set before us. And when we are there, church, right? It is a feast on the abundance of his house. It is drinking from the rivers of his delight. It is life, and it is life. So at the end of the story, kind of after the Feast of Babette, which I was telling you guys before, after the feast is all over and they decide that she's not actually this sort of witch who has these weird motives, the two sisters go to Babette and they kind of come to say their goodbyes. Because she's been with them for almost 15 years and she's been working as a housekeeper for free, just doing all these menial jobs. And they come to say goodbye. So when are you leaving? Right? Now that you have all this money, now that you've won the lottery, surely you're going to go back to France, like go buy a house by the sea and live it up. And she looks at him, she says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving. There's nothing there for me. This is my home, and I don't have any money. Everything I won, I spent on you. She spent every penny that she won to prepare this feast. And they're just completely aghast that she would do such an extravagant thing. And church, so it is with God. So it is with Jesus. Everything that he has, everything that he had, he gave it all up. He gave it all up so that he could come, so he could overcome the world, so he could overcome this pecking order that we find ourselves striving in, that leaves us feeling only wanting more and not satisfied. He gave it all up. He took everything that he had and he poured it out on our feet, and he prepared a table for you, a feast in the presence of our enemies, so that we could not So we could say, I'm not going to eat from that table anymore. I'm done eating from that table. I'm going to sit here in the feast, in the cathedral of his creation, and enjoy what the Lord has had for us. I'm going to tell you, church, better is one day. Better is one day in his courts than 1,000 elsewhere. You know, to the world, that's foolishness. It's foolishness to step out of that race, to step out of the system of how we're supposed to succeed. It's absolute foolishness. They cannot understand it. But to those who believe, it is the power of God. And I'm telling you, as someone who has sat at both tables, I'm never going back. I am never going back to that table. And, you know, as I was preparing this talk and I was sort of thinking over my life over the last, 15 years of when I came really fully with my heart and gave it to God, and I am not the same person that I was. Thank God I am not that person. Because that bread, it is just bitter in my mouth. It is not, I do not want that. You know, I think about Jesus in the wilderness, and after 40 days, after he was hungry, right? And the enemy came to him and it was like, see those stones? Turn those stones to loaves. If you're really the Son of God, do this. And he said, man does not live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. And here's the thing, church, we have to eat. It is our physical and it is our spiritual condition. And we will eat, right? Everybody eats. I mean, there's, sort of the thought of people, it's like, oh, I don't, people who say they don't believe in God or they don't, that's not the system that they believe in. Well, they believe in something. Everybody believes in something. And we do have a choice. We have a choice not to go back to that table. I'm going to tell you that the world, every single day, your flesh and the enemy will tell you that table is good. That table is easy. That table will get you the things that you want. And sometimes it is tempting, right? Sometimes we can go over there and we can sit and we can just kind of smell it. What's that smell like? No, I'm serious. There's a verse in Numbers 4. I don't know, somebody who knows way more about the Bible can tell me if I'm wrong. And it talks about the Israelites after they're brought out of Egypt, after they're brought out of slavery, and they're in the desert, and God has provided us this manna for them. And instead of just sitting in gratitude, they're just moaning. Oh, do you remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt? Oh, it was so good. We didn't even have to pay for the fish. They just gave it to us for free. Ooh, and the onions, they took those onions. Those were so good. And they're sitting there thinking about it. They're totally blinded. They're totally blinded to their condition. God brought them out of slavery. He freed them, and they just want to go back to eat the fish. Okay. But man, how many times have we looked at that fish? Ooh, that fish looks good. Look how easy it is for them to get that fish. A life of faith, of working out our salvation with fear and trembling, it does cost us something. But that which we give up has nothing compared to what we gain in Christ. Let not the foot of arrogance come upon me, nor the hand of the wicked drive me away. I feel like that is our prayer at the end. Lord, we know that the feast that you have set before us is better than anything. And we will put anything aside to sit at your table, under your order, under your love, under your faithfulness, which we cannot earn. Let's be very clear about that. In the world, it is earning your place, but the gift of God is free. It puts us all on that playing field. We cannot earn our place there. We cannot earn a seat at the head of the table. We can't earn the mountains around us or the seat. It's his common good. It is his grace. But we can come in thanksgiving and we can pray to him, Lord, let me not be like that child again who forgets your goodness. Do not let me forget. Do not be like the Israelite wanting the soup again. Don't let that arrogance come upon me, Jesus. Keep me here and keep me with you. Continue your steadfast love and your righteousness to the upright of heart. And so, church, this morning, this is our invitation. We are all here. We are all living in this broken world, right? We are in it, and we try to accept that we are not of it. But the temptation is there. And so we have a choice. We can continue making our mud pies. We continue eating our stale soup. Or we can let God open our eyes to the reality of what that is. The striving of our flesh, of the world, of the enemy. And we can cancel our reservation. I'm not going there. And we can come back and we can feast at the table of God. Let's stand. You know, I've been talking about kind of this imagery of a feast. About obviously, like, we're not all going to go walk. It would be awesome. We should have catered a whole feast in the lobby after this, right? Unfortunately, we didn't. but the thing is it's not always about that. Like, when I think about the story of Babette's feast, which I do recommend if you guys want to go read it or watch it, is what happened at that table was that instead of them fighting against each other, vying for themselves, they extended grace, mercy, forgiveness for each other. The condition of their heart was changed. That inward focus was brought out. And as a church, as a people, as the children of God, what would it look like for us to do the same? Right? Instead of that inward focus, but to look to God, to reflect his light to each other, to extend grace and forgiveness and generosity to each other. And so we're going to move into a time of prayer. This is a space that we leave at the end of every service at River City Church because we believe that God in real time is still speaking to us, is still calling us. Right? Every day of our journey is a day that we come before him and we say, God, I want what you have. I want the feast that you have set before me. And so we're going to leave time this morning to respond for that. I encourage you to take a few minutes and in your heart and with God and in your spirit to examine what is it that you have been feasting on in this world, hoping that it will fulfill you. Only to have it leave you empty and hungry and wanting more. And the invitation is to put that aside, put it at the foot of his cross, and to move for the goodness that he has for you and he has for our church. And I just want to take a minute, just quietly, all where we are, just to kind of make space for God to speak to us. And then in a minute, we'll have the prayer ministers come forward, but just encourage you to take this minute because we have the time. I was thinking about this talk and the idea of his delight and his feast and just the goodness of his creation that he has for us. I kept getting this one picture over and over again in my head. And it was when I was in high school, I was on the crew team, and we used to get up at a ridiculously early hour in the morning to practice and to row when everything was quiet and everything was still and it was nothing but the birds and the fish and the boat. And I have this very specific memory, this feeling of putting my hands in the river as the boat moves forward. And I feel like that is what God has for us this morning. Just that we enter into the river of his delights. We put our fingers and our toes in his water to refresh us, to restore us, to remind us of who we are in him because of what he has given so freely to us. And so if you're a prayer minister, if you want to come forward and just make space for those who want to receive prayer this morning. If you're someone whose mouth is dry, who needs to be refreshed, who needs to be reminded of the goodness of God, maybe someone who has been tempted to go back to the table set before them by the world, I encourage you to come up and receive from him this morning, right? Ask him to open your eyes to see the goodness that he has for you. I also feel like there are people in here who have been really praying, interceding for people that are in their life that are maybe still sitting at that other table, and they just can't see the goodness. They can't see the promise of what God has for them. And so I encourage you also, if there's someone that you have been praying for, to continue this morning to intercede for them, to pray for breakthrough. And anything else, we always make space for healing, physical, emotional, spiritual. If you would like to receive prayer for any of these, I encourage you just to come forward. And the way we do it at RCC is we just stand here and we hold out our hands like we're receiving a gift. And that lets our prayer ministers know that you would like prayer, but it also postures our heart to receive from God what he has for us this morning.